Videos. I'm Jillian McCarthy, Field Marketing and Event Manager at Goldcast. Welcome to Event Marketers Live. If you're a veteran guest, you've seen the newsroom before, but if today's your first time, welcome. Before we jump into our chat with Kathryn and Nikki, we want to share some of the latest insights and updates from our Event Marketers Club community. If you aren't already a part of the community, pop over to the Docs tab to join us. Some of the top trends that we've been seeing in the community are conferences. Folks are sharing how to draw attention to their booths. Next on the list is jobs, interviews, and compensation. Members are hiring and they're sharing about it. The job board is active with many current opportunities in the B2B marketing space. Also, as Goldcast has just launched the Demand Gen Compensation Report, we are chatting about all things fair compensation. Next on the list are tool recommendations. Anything from how to best repurpose your event content to how to automate repetitive tasks. Goldcast's Content Lab has been getting in the spotlight a lot this month. And last but not least, templates for sales enablement, budget setting, and more. Members are sharing best practices and tips and tricks for how to plan and empower your internal teams for your upcoming events. If you want to learn about these topics and more, come join us in our Event Marketers Club. Now over to you, Belinda. Excited to hear more from Kathryn and Nikki.
Hello. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from. Welcome to Event Marketers Live. If this is your first time watching our show, welcome. I am your host. My name is Belinda, so thank you for being here today. I love the icebreaker question of today. What would be your walkout song? So love it, Beyonce. We got some Taylor Swift. I don't know. I probably have to go with like Kelly Clarkson maybe, or some like Christina Aguilera. Some real strong female power there. So I love it. So definitely let us know what your song is. I love this question. Well, couple of things before we jump into it. We have a very special addition to EML today. And so what we're going to be doing, if you have an extra 15 minutes to spare after today's event, we are actually going to be hosting a networking session right after the webinar. And this is going to be for our Event Marketers Club. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what Event Marketers Club is, it's actually a community of event marketers like us. And it's a place where we can connect with each other, where we can network and just learn. So I definitely encourage you guys, if you are not already a member, I definitely encourage you to join. And you can actually do that just by clicking the link above that says join the club. So as I was saying, we're actually going to spend 15 minutes today after this webinar, just for all of us to kind of get together. So if you have the time, you have the extra 15 minutes, stick around, come chat with some of our community members and get to know each other. Jillian and I will also be there, and, hopefully we can come and chat with you guys and meet with you. So again, click the link above to join. And if you have time, stick around afterwards. As part of this networking event, we are going to be raffling off 4 $25 gift cards. So just by joining the networking session today, you will be automatically entered into that raffle. And this is actually going to be for any new members. So if you are not a member of the Event Marketers Club community just yet, you will have an opportunity to win a gift card if you join our networking session. So I do hope to see you guys there. All right. Now, with that, are you guys ready to meet our guests? Because we have some pretty awesome ladies joining me on the stage today, and I am super excited to have them joining me today. So please, you guys, drop a round of applause in the chat, a GIF, an emoji, and help me welcome Nikki Sherin and Kathryn Frankson to the stage. Hello.
Hi.
All vibrant and springy. I love it. Love the colors.
I have spring fever. I had to run with it. Total spring fever over here.
Oh, awesome. Nikki, hello. How are you?
Good. See, it's a dreary day. You're probably in the Boston area too, Belinda. It's not the nicest day around here, but it's the colors are giving me life.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, yes, let's give them a round of applause, everybody. I'm so excited to have you both here. Obviously, our audience is too. So before we jump into our discussion, why don't you guys kind of introduce yourselves, who you are, who you work for, what you do. So Kathryn, I will start with you.
Sure. Hi. Hey, everyone. I love the chat. I could just literally stare at gifts all day. I'm the Global Director of Marketing at Money 2020. So we do a series of global conferences and trade shows for the fintech market. We're launching in Bangkok in about a week and a half. So that's happening, and an event in Amsterdam and in Las Vegas as well. But my background is really in all things events. So I came up on the sales side, all the sales stuff, BDR up to enterprise, did ops for a bit. You'll not see me going back in that direction. So shout out to everyone who's doing ops. You're amazing. And then made the leap over to marketing. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years.
Oh, I love it. You have definitely had your hands in everything. So definitely lots of interesting skill sets to apply to the job. So I love that. I love that.
And stories, but that'll be
Oh,
for
I'm
another
sure.
day. Yeah.
Awesome. Nikki, how about you? Want to introduce yourself to our team, our group?
Sure. Thanks everyone for joining. I'm Nikki Sherin. I lead marketing for our event marketing for Broadcom. We were actually, I'm former VMware. We were acquired by Broadcom back in November. So I've been with VMware since 2014. So for the better part of a decade, I've been working on our flagship programs, which is, it was VMworld, now VMware Explore. We run global events in Las Vegas and in Barcelona. We've done events though in Singapore and Brazil. And Japan to amplify the message. Typically user conferences that we're executing, but with the shift to Broadcom, my team has increased scope. So now we're overseeing all of the events that are from a corporate-led perspective within Broadcom versus just being around the flagship events. So we're kind of navigating that piece right now. A lot of learnings there, but obviously my baby is Explore. So we're excited that that's coming up this summer.
Amazing. Can't wait to hear more about that. So lots of great expertise here on the stage. And so really looking forward to you guys sharing your tips with our audience. And so with that, I think let's go ahead and jump into our very first segment, which is Hacks and Hot Takes. All right. So ladies, we are all about productivity and efficiency and learning new ways to think about event marketing. So Nikki, I actually wanted to start with you because I know you have a very interesting take on how events should be measured, especially when it comes to the use of events, using events as a way for pipeline acceleration. So why don't you tell us a little bit more on kind of your thought process around that and how we should be thinking about events and how they drive results?
Yeah, and I think it's obviously very nuanced and very specific to the kinds of events that you are trying to execute on. So where our bread and butter is user conferences. So these are existing customers that we get to come to our events to engage. We want to enable them. We want them to have access to technical training. We want to expose them to new product features and functions and talking to experts and connecting with their peers and really a community function. There is a sales piece to it. We obviously run things like a meetings program. There's some executive leadership meetings happening because really it is a pull event. We want people to use the opportunity and the platform to be able to get business done as they see fit. And the events team is truly responsible for just ensuring that we provide the platform and the programming to make sure that that happens. So as an events team, I think that, as I'm seeing different job postings going out now, you see these very catch-all marketing roles there. You want someone who's an expert in content and in marketing and in operations. And then you're also told, oh, and you have to drive pipeline. I think I really appreciate the way Broadcom looks at the events and what they do is saying, we're going to eliminate some of that pipeline pressure from you as a corporate marketing function and let you focus on what you guys are truly experts at, which is putting on world-class events and making sure that people are consuming content on site, building engagement, and looking at pipeline as sort of an outcome, a positive outcome that comes from some of these activities, but ensuring that our KPIs as an events team are more about engagement, NPS score, session scores, overall buzz, amplification. It's our big press moment. So a lot of product announcements are happening there. Engagement we see online, engagement within the community, signups for some of our community groups like VMUG and our customer rewards. There's all of those different elements that we can control more as an events organization, where pipeline is obviously that secondary sales motion that can happen as a result. And I think when we used to run our events through the VMware lens, it was a kind of one VMware approach. We had a cross-functional alignment group around our divisions and all of our business units that kind of came together, and this was our coming out party that we kind of would have. Now we're at a new sort of company where there's 26 divisions and they all operate essentially as independent businesses. So now we're a house of brands. We're like a Procter & Gamble or a Unilever, if you think of it that way, where we need to just have the unifying program, the event, to be that place that brings people together, that serves up the opportunity. So some of these new divisions that want to get involved to say, here's what we can offer as part of the programming. Here's what we can offer as part of the event experience. Here's why your customer should probably come and why you should take advantage of this opportunity so that your teams and your sales can go off and transact any business that's going to happen in a post-event motion. But really what I focus on from a marketing perspective, who I'm trying to drive to this event, our IT practitioners that are existing customers, get them consuming. And then that ultimately has a great outcome. We want to get them exposed. We want that positive impression on them as it comes to the business. But I believe that events teams, in order to do the best work they need to do, can work on the KPIs they can control around engagement, enablement, amplification, where pipeline is more of sales or demand functions. And that does sit outside of my actual team. So it's a little bit of a relief to be able to then just think solely about event execution versus worrying about that secondary piece. Not that we're not going to help inform, not that we're not going to help ensure that teams have what they need to take the next step. But I do believe that, like, these jobs I see where it's like someone's responsible for pipeline on top of everything else, I go, events jobs are hard. Events jobs are really complicated and complex. Like, let's look at what people have actual expertise in and make sure that we can measure them on that from a KPI perspective.
Yeah, no, I think makes total sense. And, you're 100% right. Like, the events role, I mean, it definitely has shifted, and you're seeing like a lot of events functions are now rolling under demand gen for that very purpose, right? Because there's that responsibility, and now there's that accountability to bring in that pipeline. But I think in the sense of, where your focus is and you're looking at your customers, right? So now it's really about how do we keep them? How do we keep them as a customer, right? That retention, and maybe there are potential opportunities for other upsell or expansion opportunities. But at the end of the day, you want to be able to retain those customers because they are the ones that are keeping the business going. And so, and I know we had Austin Sandmeyer from Sendoso a while back was just talking about, pipeline isn't just about bringing in net new, right? It's also about your customers and, thinking about that and how do you develop programs to keep them happy and to keep continuing to build those relationships. And so I think it definitely makes sense that, let's focus on the things that's where we can have some control, where we have the expertise, because especially now, the attendee experience, right? I mean, expectations are so different than what they were 4 years ago or 10 years ago. And you have to be able to understand your audience. You need to understand what they're looking for and making sure you're kind of building your plan, your strategy around that initial experience. Kind of like the attendee experience comes first, right? And so being able to focus on that, I think is key. And especially when you're talking about 26 different divisions and you're having to find a way to bring all of those people together and being able to deliver information and content for each of those different product offerings. So amazing. Now, Kathryn, I'm interested in getting your take. Like, how are you guys deciding on the type of events that you're doing over at Money 2020?
You know what? Yeah, my hot take is that I think with events, we live a little bit too much in the middle. So with Money 2020, what we put on for our events is large scale B2B conferences and trade shows, unmissable experiences, as we like to call them. But to your point, Belinda, exactly. And really, Nikki, who's like wrangling a million different things. If we think of what we have to build and what we have to promise to audiences and what we have to delight them with, whether it's an internal user conference, an association event, or a B2C or a B2B event, right? What you're building has to be worthy of their time and attention. And we know this, right? We know this. We've gone on the journey the last couple of years and we know it, but we're at the rubber meeting the road. And certainly to grow a new business, they're going to have a certain lens, and then to retain customers and clients, that's another lens that they're using. So when I say about being in the middle, events they're a lift, right? We're all always a little tired because there's just a lot to get done all the time. And the two pieces that can be harder to live in, but that are so crucial right now, are extreme creativity and product build, just to the nth degree. What product are you making? Are you building? Is it creative? Is it different? Is it world-class? And in whatever variation that is, right? Money 2020, we have a very clear ethos. That's not the one size fits all for events. It's just within what you're delivering for your audience. Is it creative? Is it interesting? And then the other end that I say that is so important is the operational, and not event ops, although I love them, the marketing, operational, sales ops, rev ops, because what happens is there's more of a need to measure and deliver and dissect, and is this working, and we did this big thing, and is it delivering what we need, and can I make a case for more budget for a new channel? And that gets so hard if it's not underpinned with a marketing operations function, right? If you are spending so much of your time trying to pull data and get audience insights and then did this and did it go downstream and I can't, I'm trying to justify. Those are the two pieces that we kind of coming out of that, trying to get things done. We're doing the event, we're doing heavy volume. My marketing to-do list or my sales to-do list is super long, coming a little bit up for air and trying to live in those two ends, because without that, it's harder to grow or recover at the rates that we want to with our event builds.
Yeah, no, 100%. And, I mean, when we know, like as event marketers, right, we know how effective events can be. It is a very effective channel, right? It's great for brand awareness. It's great for lead generation. And it is great for, pipeline generation or acceleration, depending on the types of events you're throwing and what that objective is. But equally though, right, like how do you bring all those pieces together and just making sure that you have a solid kind of campaign that you can run and wrap around that event to make sure that it is effective and that you're getting those desired results. So like any just like quick tips there on how you can kind of pull something together to help execute an event as part of an overall campaign.
So we have a very clear structure that we stick with to develop the event that fits into the campaigns, which is an event theme. Might sound really on the nose, but what happens is you can have pieces sort of spinning all over. You've got stage design, you've got where your sponsors are going after, you've got who you're trying to bring in for delegates, and it can get disjointed or not feel like it's as elevated as you want. So this year it's human by machine. That's probably pretty on the nose for why that feeds into what that content structure is, that feeds into the marketing campaigns. But what's so crucial about that is we make a very clear decision on what the audience personas are each year, and the 3 to 5 tier 1 campaigns that we're going to make as big bets that are going to drive that. And because you have to make some big swings. You just can't go, maybe we feel good about our list size, or maybe we feel good about if we have some budget for paid or partners or affiliates, whatever you're doing. We usually go after volume, but you have to decide on what those 3 big bets that you're going to make are. What's the campaign? What is it? It's going to differ depending on what your audience segment is. But without those 2 things, you're going to be running, but you're probably not going to feel those 1 or 2 or 3 peaks that you need to before the event. And you're going to really kind of be holding your nerve all the way up to it on pacing or pipeline generation.
Yeah. And I think this is where that alignment across, different teams and making sure that you're working with your GTM teams, right? With sales, with demand gen, with product marketing, right? And just making sure there's a clear understanding and you're all on the same page in terms of like, what are those things that we're all going after? How does it tie back to the product roadmap, and how do we make sure that we're building the right programs to execute on that? And then Karen actually had a quick question. I'm going to go ahead and share this up to the screen. Do your personas change very much from year to year?
So they can. I mean, certainly if we've looked over the past few years of fintech, they're not the core, I would say, but the depth of what's the startup profile, how are we seeing with VCs or CEO growth, there was a big crypto and blockchain year within there. So there's definitely, you want to know, it's probably 80-20, you have that core, but there is an evolution to that every year. So we do take a big chunk of time to look at the data.
Amazing. All right. Well, we are going to actually have to move on to our next segment, which is actually one of my favorites. And this is Dear Goldcast. We actually invite our viewers to submit a question so that our guests could give some real-time advice. So let's take a listen.
Dear Goldcast, I'm looking for guidance on content repurposing. It seems like a smart way to maximize the value of our efforts while reaching our audience in various formats and channels. I just don't know where to start and how to prioritize efforts effectively. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on building an on-demand library. Should it be ungated or gated? While gating can be beneficial for lead generation, it sometimes feels like a barrier for engagement. How do you strike the right balance between capturing leads and providing valuable, accessible content to your audience? I would also love to use in-person events as a means of generating content. What types of content have you found to be most effective in capturing and repurposing the essence of live events for digital consumption? There's always the eternal debate between videos and blogs. Both formats have their merits, but I often struggle to determine which is best suited to our objectives and audience preferences. In your experience, what factors should we consider when making this decision? And how can we effectively repurpose content between these mediums to amplify our message? Thank you, a marketer looking to make the most of their content.
Okay, I absolutely love this question. We know content is queen, y'all. So I think very relevant right now. If you're not already, I do encourage every event marketer to really start thinking about how they can include a content strategy as part of their event plans. But to our letter here, Kathryn, I'm going to start with you. Any initial thoughts here?
Yes, there was 3 or 4 really good questions in that one big question, which is great. So I do have a perspective on this. So I actually listened to a really good podcast the other week, and there was some really good language in it around value loops. The way that we're looking at content is heavily native channel first, video rich, very human centric, attention getting. That's the opportunity. Bring it out behind the gate, meet people where they are, where their attention is. You're going to get a lot more reach within that, a lot of bang for your buck, especially depending on where you're investing. The reality, though, is gated and ungated, depending on your goals, both have some value to them. And you obviously, at any point, want to be growing an audience list, growing a potential customer list, depending on what you're doing with that, right? Just outside of maybe the sales team needs leads. Just as a business, there's always going to be a component of that. You want people to be able to sign up to some sort of motion and come into the fray. So that's really how I think of it. I've worked in past years where you're doing you're doing a lot of gated content or webinars or virtual or white papers, and there's a time and a place for that. I think if you have to make some choices though, and you can't do all of those content pillars, I would think of something that is ungated first, but that once they get to know your brand and you're meeting them and you're entertaining and educating and all that stuff, of course they have a way to sign up and enter into that value loop where now they can get more content from you. So that's definitely where I would lean. On the creating content on site and capturing it at an event, I would say that's where 2020, certainly, we are putting a lot of time and effort. And actually, a lot of our sponsors are putting a lot of their time and effort. So it is, I would say, one of the singular biggest opportunities for an event experience that you can do. And in any way that you invest in that, it's so powerful. So actually, I was joking the other day, we were doing a campaign and I was like, it's not your stand. We say stand for some of our European events. It's not your stand. It's your 365 marketing plan. But that's actually because the amount of content that you can capture at an event is, the pipeline for that is extensive. And so that's, for us, that looks like podcasts, both first party and third party. So podcasting, who are you inviting in? How are you involving the press with that? How are you involving your key personas? We also do a lot of video work on site. And then you take that and you're repurposing it into other elements. So actually I saw an infographic and the data. Yep, that's a great one, right? There's just so many stones to overturn there. So I think the key with on-site is starting with the end in mind. What ultimately what stories do you need to tell? That is, I would say, for us, what the biggest shift was, going from, okay, we're going to get B-roll, or we're going to do a hype video, or we need some photography, or we're going to connect with these journalists. It was a little bit on the nose. And when we really sat down and decided to put a focus on what's the next gen of this playbook, it completely changed what we were doing. It was, these are the stories that we really have to be telling. And so we put camera crews on people to follow them around the event in a very different way. But we've also seen sponsors, and I've shared it on LinkedIn, but they built, their stand was actually a podcast studio. It looked like a sauna. It was called In the Hot Seat, and people could come in and do interviews. But there's just varying degrees of that. You can do high production. You can hire one single videographer to come in, one editor. There's ways to do it where it's really affordable and manageable to do. But I would say it requires a real plan around it. It requires a real focus on, what do we want that output to be? How much should it be? Yes, strategically, it's absolutely the right decision to make. We're going to do it. We should go all in on this, no matter what the size and scope of the event is. But what is that plan? How do we take it a layer deeper? That's the key, because otherwise you're going to get down and you're going to get some, big files dropped your way. And you might not, once you start to dig into it, you might not feel like you have everything you want or the stories that you want to tell for the year or the quarters ahead. So that strategic piece and those hard questions is really important.
No, that's great tip. Great tip. Nikki, anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I echo a lot of what Kathryn's saying. I think the biggest piece is more and more teams are recognizing this is a need, and this is something about a year ago we all came together and said as an events team, this is going to take more work than just what we can pick up, because it does require attention, expertise, a strategic approach. So we made the case and we hired for it. So now we have a full-time content marketing person on our team who is looking at what that 365 plan looks like. Because we had the first approach is pretty easy. People go on-demand video library. That's what they do in a post-event motion. We've always had that. We've posted our content for the past at least 10 years since I've been on the program. Problem was we were posting everything. We had over 3 years worth of sessions on there. So kind of the first approach that we took with our content marketer was say, how do we make this consumable? This is too much. This is, the jam experiment on steroids for anyone who's familiar with the sociological study. And, she came in and started curation. So starting small with like, let's take this and bite size it down. Let's take the content that we've recorded on site, particularly from the breakout session perspective. We obviously do all of kind of that B-roll, customer references, all of those filmings on site that you have to do as part of a larger motion. But certainly it was, all right, you start with an on-demand library, but how do you really do curations? How do we cut down? Do we really need 3 years worth of videos? No one's looking at it. Look at the data. Let that inform what people are consuming, how they're looking at your pages. Consult with your UX teams to figure out how to build a tool that's going to be really important for you to surface up the right kind of information. And then start meeting people kind of where they are in terms of the content marketing strategy. We are team no gate. That is a Broadcom policy, basically, is that we don't gate the assets. Lead gen's not really a thing that exists at Broadcom. It's kind of a funny adjustment for all of us, but where we are ungating content. But what I found really interesting, Julia Saris just mentioned this in one of his most recent newsletters, which is a great follow if anyone has. He said, driving attendance to register without a previous content interaction will be prohibitive in the near future. So what we're hopeful of is that by creating more of a content marketing strategy around Explore is people are consuming, we give them all this free stuff, but then we've just launched a newsletter that we've gotten great traction on with our Save the Date motion to say, okay, we need first party because third party cookies are going to pose an issue for us in the future. So let's think ahead to getting first party. And let's start doing some more gated content there, like exclusive webinars or interactions with key speakers. It's a really techie, nerdy kind of group that we work with, and they are very community driven. So how can we give exclusive access to some of those things through a gated asset that is going to get us really quality people in that pool? So we can do some first party, or we can use that first party data to market a little bit more thoughtfully to that group. And then maybe there's some on-site things if they do come, but ultimately, our goal in terms of what we look at for a model is we want to get people who maybe can't justify their attendance this year, but we want to show the continued value of Explore to get them to come next year. Because like I said, these are existing customers, and we do find that there is a natural acceleration that happens for adoption if people come on site. So we want them to understand like, oh, like these sessions are actually really great. I would love to go see these in person next year. So doing that piece, and then to Kathryn's point too, is starting with, some of your lower lift channels of like blog. We started doing, okay, how do we use AI as an example with generating summaries for our top sessions? And let's make a blog series around that to kind of just show a little bit of those chops, because it was actually an in-house built LMN. And so they were building that language learning model and running our sessions through there. So then we were able to create derivative content out of that to say, hey, like you want a summary? Our AI tool generated this. So basically getting people interested from that respect, and then using our organic social. We are dipping our toes in other ways to do this as we plan for on-site, because again, you need to have, now that we have this person and she's been on for a year, she's able to look at the landscape, understand the community, understand what people are, understand the audience, to then build the strategy for what do we need to capture on-site moving forward. And, we've already looked at the data and we've already decided like, we're not going to record our European sessions because a lot of the same people are consuming our Vegas sessions. So let's invest there. Let's figure out what we can do there in order to better provide for the attendees, because we were giving them 700 recorded sessions in an on-demand video library with not a great search functionality. So how can we just get smarter about how we're coming to our customers and providing that content to them moving forward? So I think it ultimately is very much, you have to take it seriously and you have to make the investment there. And oftentimes, like it's a lot to take on for maybe a single person. Like if you're in a startup mode or if you're at a smaller event, it's really challenging. So starting small and you don't have to boil the ocean. You can start some of those kind of content marketing motions without having to dive right in. So we're taking the baby steps, but it takes time, but it is something that I think everyone's going to have to obviously pay attention to and build a really clear strategy around.
You just said something that I was just going to bring up too, right? So to your point, I know you talked about, you guys talked about the value of this a year ago. And so you decided to make the investment in bringing in someone to focus their attention on this. But to your point, right? Not everybody's going to have that additional resource. And, sometimes an events team is a person of one or maybe two people, right? And so, I think going back to both of your points about, again, understanding your audience, meeting them where they're at, like where are they collecting their information? How do they want to consume that information? Because again, you don't want to waste your time and energy into producing content in certain channels that they may not even be paying attention to. So if that is, small snippet videos, or if it is a blog post, but just really understanding what that channel is. And like to your point, Nikki, right, starting small and going from there. And I think that's something that we've been doing. We definitely practice, what we preach in terms of, the event doesn't have to end because it ended. It doesn't mean it ends there, right? You want it to live on even up to a year after the event is over, right? And there's just so much great information that you can get out of your events. And so we just did an event, was it like last month around video repurposing. And, we're finding that our audience prefers short little 30-second videos, right? Like that's the preference. That's the attention span that they have right now to consume information. And that's how they want to consume that information. And so now we're thinking, okay, every event that we're putting on, how can we then deliver on that for them? So
it just to detail that point, because it's such a smart one. It is so important on the planning piece. It does not matter the size and the scope. Every event there's so much going on. And what we all probably feel like is like if you kick yourself when you're after the fact, you're like, oh, I didn't know about this thing, or maybe even a fringe thing that was going on, or someone brought in this, or there was this meetup or this cool thing, or if only depending on how big of a build you're doing, or even if it's really small. I mean, let's be honest, we're maybe a little guilty of like packing too much into these events, because we're like, we are going to make sure they are value rich. Yeah. There's the run in the morning, then there's yoga, and then we're going to do a reading, and oh my God, this author will do this, and we'll be book signing, and there's all there's so much stuff. And so I do think sometimes the challenge is just that, like, I think we can all go like, yeah, content from events, but it is fully around the like having that map, deciding what the resource is. I would even argue, I mean, if you are a team of one, and we've all been there, I've been there, yes. It's really, you are the investment in one freelancer, one partner to come in, because it is so hard to build events in this 365 and to avoid churn and to grow attendance, whatever that thing is. And content is the unlock, because otherwise you're going to sit there and you're going to do your comms calendar for the year, and you're going to scratch your head and say, what do I say? What are people even going to care about? The event's not for 9 months. And it is, when you do that, it's actually stuff that people will watch and be like, that was an interesting clip. Like I was like curious to see someone behind the scenes, or whatever those things are. So it's make the case for it. It's a worthwhile investment. The planning, even when you're at high tide and you're busy with the execution and 1,000 other things, it's the payoff. It's just the payoff for the year ahead. And I don't think events are going to survive or thrive without that.
Great point. All right. Well, ladies, it's time for us to get into our final segment, which is one that is a very popular one for most of our audience, and that's about working with sales. All right. So I think a question that comes up a lot, right? And, we spend this time putting on these great events, but obviously we need to get the people there. So whether it's for a customer event, or it's a prospect event, or just getting someone to come by the booth or book a meeting, right? Obviously sales plays a very big, crucial part in helping us collaborate together and support those initiatives. So Nikki, I would love to start with you first in terms of, how have you been working with sales? How do you enable them to get their support, especially with working with your customer event?
Yeah, so it's actually been really interesting, because obviously being with VMware for such a long time, we had a motion, and it was primarily driven through the field marketing organization, through like the Americas for our Las Vegas event, through the EMEA groups for our Barcelona event. But with the transition to Broadcom, they've eliminated field marketing. So we don't have that anymore. So what's good and bad about that is, what's good is, again, when you're building your team from scratch in a new setting, it's basically like you're taking your whole team and just dragging and dropping it into a new company framework, structure, culture, all of those things. You can identify those gaps pretty quickly. So again, like looking at the larger landscape of where do I need to invest? And now I have a person, a body that I dedicate to sales and division enablement, because that is such a huge piece of what we do. And we no longer have that layer of field marketing to be able to provide that coverage across the board. And so when we kind of went into the Broadcom framework, it was, okay, where is sales consuming content? Where is sales getting all of their enablement assets? How can we tap into those different, communications channels? So it was really about relationship building and making sure that we found our champions within the sales organization, whether that is the lead of America's chief of staff or strategic sales, EA, and just getting conversations going and building relationships to be able to say, what internal comms channels are you leveraging? We spun up our Marcom lead has spun up an entire resource center for not only marketing and divisions, but sales, to be able to go in and grab invites and collateral and marketing materials and banners and Zoom backgrounds and everything that we could possibly give them to just promote the program. But we understand they have a day job. They obviously have quota to meet. So it's about just reinforcing that over and over again. And one shift we made this year to sales enablement that we haven't done before is right at the front end of our kits that we put together is more like, what's in it for sales? We've always really focused on what's in it for your customer, but we're kind of flipping the narrative a little bit when we work with sales leadership on getting quotes from them to basically reinforce, like, this is important for XYZ reason. But also like, hey, sales guy, if your customer's going, you can likely justify your attendance as well. And here's what you can accomplish while you're there. And putting that really in their face this year, because in the past it was all just, here's all the assets, here's enablement. And really we didn't serve up the value prop to sales to be like, why should you care? Not just why should your customers care? So I think that's been a shift that we've been able to do. And then also not having that field barrier, we have a direct line to sales now. And we just say, what do you guys want in a kit? It's intaking and starting from scratch and saying, what do you guys truly need? How can we best support you? What reporting do you need to make sure that the right accounts are coming? And just flipping that a little bit. So it's been really refreshing to have to go through that motion where it was a little rinse and repeat for years of like, yeah, we put together the same kit and the same channel and this and that. And now we've had to, establish ourselves within a new organization and then come up with the best ways to reach sales. And so far it's been really well received and actually really efficient in how we need to communicate with them.
And helping you get more champions too, right? I mean, and I think that's great. And I think that's such good advice and definitely, something that I've been hearing a lot from other event marketers as well, right? It's building that relationship, talking their language, right? So to your point, I think that's a great question to ask. Like, what's important to you? Like, how can I help you? And being that supportive function to them as well. So I know I had an old CMO tell me like all the time, like, you want to, talk about the revenue in the room, right? That's what they're going to care about. So, you want to talk about what accounts and why is this going to be beneficial? Like, oh, you get prospect A and B in there. This is going to be great for you. And like, so yeah, being able to speak their language and in the terms that they're going to care about. So Kathryn, how about you? How do you work with your sales team?
What I think is really interesting is that Nikki and I work in sort of different industries and different type of events. And we just made the exact same 3 changes internally. So it's kind of what we were, had more of an external or an agency function support. We've now put a resource right in with the sales team. So we have a direct line into it because some of this is honestly first principles where you're like, the teams are measured differently. Like we're goaled differently. We operate off of different incentives, like marketing. A lot of time your strengths are different than sales and it all should be complementary. But a lot of times we're creating more work for sales, quite frankly, and we can lose a little bit of that empathetic piece of how hard it is to be in sales. And I always say, I remember one of the things that I first heard when I was actually making the changeover is that, marketing, and I love marketing. I like, live and breathe it, but we get credit for all the effort. Like we made the landing page, we did the thing, like we could just make decks upon decks of all the things that we've done. Not to say that it's not, I mean, we're hub and spoke, right? Everything goes through marketing. It's a huge list. It's the biggest list ever. But, sales are only getting credit for when it's done across the finish line. And so all of this stuff feels like an afterthought, right? Like they're trying to move, they're almost always trying to move the biggest rocks, whether we see it or anyone sees it or not, because that's just the only way that they're incentivized. And so we made that exact same shift, which is that it felt like you're doing the X's and the O's and you're like, well, we've packaged things up and we've sent this thing, we've sent referral stuff and we've shared, and doesn't it look pretty? And isn't it great? And, here's my tracker. And 3 people have, it's, and that's just also not really great partnership. And it's trying to break down like this that just happens everywhere. And so, yeah, really that's what we did too. We have a team member that sits directly in sales that cares deeply about sales. We communicate more. We've shifted more to what this means for you, or what matters to you right now, and how can we help. I'd also say that we've made some of that simpler. It's why I think marketing's tendency is to be, which is a good thing, very thorough and over, sometimes even with some of our referral stuff, when I was auditing it, and it was like, here's this easy guide, and it's like a 74-page deck, and it's like tips on how to do this, and just tell your clients, and you're like, okay, that's like, can you imagine walking someone through that? So some of this is like, we just hit a bunch of stuff with a simple stick as well, and I think applied a little more common sense to it, which isn't always like the best answer. We want a tech or a tool or a thing to change it, but those are really the things that have just broken down that wall and made it feel less like any friction is there.
Yeah, that's great points, both of you. I know we're getting down to the last few minutes here. Real quickly, to your point, Kathryn, right? Like sales cares about, right? It's all about closing the deal and what happens afterwards. So obviously, an event ends, we still need them to follow up on these leads, right? We want to make sure that there's follow through, and especially for those that may be existing opportunities, and that we're making sure that the event can also be influence any kind of closing of the deal. So how do you just ensure that follow-up is happening? How are you working together to make sure that they have the right messaging, or how you're going about, what that call to action looks like after that event is over?
My view is that, because we have recently retooled this, we, had the same moment where it's like, oh, there's so many leads and what's happening with them. And you're like, oh my gosh, we've become a cliche. Like it's happening before my very eyes. But it happens for a reason. I will say 2 things. One, a lot of it is the specificity of your motion and your setup. It really is like it gets so granular really quick. How many leads are there, right? Like what is do you have automation behind it? Are they all right? Like, is it being warm? Are they all literally going to a BDR? Do you use Chili Piper and meetings are going in? Do you not? And they're being manually assigned? Like you have to. So my position on it is that marketing needs to be more involved in that process than we probably ever have been historically. And you have to care about it, because otherwise that delta is the gray area. Marketing has, well, I put together the kit and I created the leads, and sales is like, yeah, well, I have active clients and I'm probably doing outbound, and I'm, doing all of these other things, and I'm updating my pipeline every day, and and on and on and on. And I'm making my own decks, and people need more information, and it's 74 calls. And so this is the gray area. And it really has been a lack of ownership over who's looking at that and going. And so it is that granular, right? Like, how are they getting it? What information are you lead scoring? Like, is it too much? Is it specific? Have you checked if they're actually new business? Is stuff going to enterprise that should be new business? Like, that's the piece that's usually the breakdown. And so marketing should own that audit and should over index on simplifying, helping. What are you giving for scripts? Because that's also where I've seen the breakdown is it's like, well, isn't that what the sales team is supposed to do? And it's like, well, not really. Maybe some, but not really. And so a lot of it is looking at that, mapping it, and then choosing what route you need to take. Because the reality is salespeople want to sell. They want to, they're no one has ever been more incentivized to like get something done. And so if they're not interested in following up with the leads, there's a why in there that you have to unpick, and you have to answer that question.
Great. Nikki, I imagine it might be a little different, especially with the customers, but how's that process look for you?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about what we're looking at this year is obviously now moving from a kind of cross-solution structure to these individualized division structure, we're trying to resist the urge to treat divisions like sponsors, just delivering leads of, tagging all of your sessions of, hey, we offer about 500 or so sessions. And they're all allowed. We have copper proposals happening right now. So folks are going in, and these are new divisions that have never participated in an Explore before. And I think initially in conversations, it felt very logical to be like, well, if they attend my session, that's my contact, right? And that's clean. And that's, kind of just making it a little bit easier and simplified to do it. But where marketing can we're trying to understand how we can show value there to a lot of these legacy Broadcom divisions. These VMware customers might be a new customer to them, but they need an entry point. So Explore is their entry point because they can kind of have a joint maybe story or solution with one of the legacy VMware divisions. And how do we then reflect that in some of the reporting we give post-event of like, hey, okay, this person attended your session, but they're a traditional customer of this division. And maybe there's a synergy or an endpoint there that you can talk about, or you can bring them into this because clearly there's interest, but here's context. Like providing additional context to them to be able to drive those conversations versus just saying, your demo pod had this many scans and here's all your demo scans. Like we just want to be more thoughtful about that. That might be what they maybe want, but I think we have an opportunity, and what we're trying to structure right now is where is that additional step that we can take as marketing to better inform it and serve up more value to sales ultimately. I don't think they just don't know what they don't know. And we're trying to kind of adapt that from a previous model, which was very robust. We had a demand function and we would take all the engagements. We would score those engagements. Anyone with a score threshold would go to sales, and anyone without would go into a nurture flow. We had a very structured lead follow-up process that was happening with partnership with field and with demand and with sales. We've totally blown that up because it's just a totally different way of working in this new function. So I think it's a good learning experience for us all to figure out like what is truly needed, valued, and how can we insert ourselves to show that continued value of just providing the additional context of attendee experience and attendee desires and consumption on site to just really drive some of those cross division pieces because they all operate as individual companies. And so it's really hard for them to see those through lines between each. And we see that at legacy VMware, but it's the newer divisions where it's really an opportunity for them. And we want to be able to assist them as best as possible in terms of how we're delivering things post-event. So working through it, but it's certainly something that is not quite considered yet, but I think we have an opportunity. So it's really good to kind of stretch our legs there.
Yeah. So, basically to recap, right? Obviously it's, having that constant communication, building that relationship, finding your champions, right? Making sure that we have a clear understanding of what is important to them and to their customers and how we can support them. Also understanding, when it comes to that post-event strategy or how you're going to follow up, understanding how are those leads being scored, how they're being routed, making, we just can't blast leads to everybody. We have to have a clear understanding of who's going to be following up and why and what that's going to look like for them. And it's marketing's responsibility to make sure that we're keeping track of that information and, working with all of your teams to kind of help building those reports, working with your ops team, your rev ops team, your marketing ops teams to help you kind of see that information and have that data. That way you can go back and have these conversations with the appropriate folks in sales to make sure you're following up. We are down to the last minute. So ladies, I want to thank you both. Again, thank you so much for being here with us today, for taking time to join us and for just sharing all of your insights around, pipeline, creating events for pipeline and as well as, driving effective campaigns. Just a lot of great insights. I can tell from the chat, it was buzzing. So I think a lot of the people here also very much enjoyed your participation today. So thank you again for being here. Thank you. And then for our audience, obviously, if you want to connect with Kathryn or Nikki, you can find them on LinkedIn. Thank you to you, all of you, for taking the time to join us this afternoon. Again, we are going to be hanging around for another, 10 to 15 minutes in a networking session. So if you guys are interested, please do feel free to stay behind. Like I said, Jillian and I will be there. We're just going to have a conversation. We can follow up on our discussion from today and talk a little bit more about what you guys are doing within your organizations and kind of just sharing some insights with each other. So with that, take care, everybody. And thanks again for being here.